Enduring commitment. The passage of the United Nations Participation Act of 1945 established the legal structure that still guides how the United States engages with the international community. Its influence runs across decades, shaping U.S. diplomacy, global security decisions, and the country's long-term role within the United Nations. A timeline-based account shows how a law passed at the end of World War II created a framework that continues to define U.S. involvement in global affairs. In 1945, the end of the war created urgent pressure for a new model of cooperation. The United Nations Charter took effect on October 24, 1945, establishing the General Assembly, the Security Council, and a wide network of specialized agencies. On December 4, 1945, the U.S. Senate approved the United Nations Participation Act with a vote of 65-7. On December 20, 1945, President Harry S. Truman signed it into law. The act authorized the president to appoint representatives to the United Nations, required Senate confirmation for the permanent representative, and mandated that the United States provide periodic reports to Congress on its activities within the organization. The act also required congressional approval before the United States could enter agreements committing military forces to Security Council operations. This framework balanced executive authority with legislative oversight. In 1946, the act enabled the appointment of the first U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Edward Stettinius Jr., who helped establish procedures for Security Council voting and General Assembly participation. Throughout the late 1940s, the act supported U.S. participation in United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration operations, which coordinated international food, medical, and resettlement assistance. American representatives, legally empowered by the act, worked in early meetings that shaped emerging global institutions in health, labor, and development. In 1950, the act guided U.S. responses during the Korean War, when the Security Council authorized military action following the invasion of South Korea. The legal structure created in 1945 ensured that American representatives could cast decisive votes during Security Council sessions. Congress continued to use the Act's provisions when evaluating the scope of U.S. involvement in United Nations authorized operations. Through the 1950s and 1960s, the United Nations became a central platform for diplomacy during the Cold War. The Act allowed American delegations to participate in debates on arms control, atomic energy regulation, and the admission of new member states. As decolonization accelerated, many newly independent nations joined the United Nations and reshaped voting coalitions in the General Assembly. U.S. representatives, appointed under the Act's authority, adapted to this change by forming new diplomatic strategies to address emerging global issues such as human rights, development finance, and peacekeeping norms. By the 1970s, U.S. participation in specialized agencies expanded. The Act continued to support American involvement in organizations focusing on labor standards, agricultural development, refugee protection, and international law. Congressional oversight, which the Act required, shaped debates over funding obligations, voting influence, and the role of the United States in multilateral programs. In the 1980s, the Act framed U.S. decisions about engagement with United Nations bodies addressing global crises, including famine relief, nuclear non-proliferation, and regional conflicts. It also provided the foundation for U.S. participation in negotiations over international treaties developed through UN mechanisms. The Act's reporting requirements ensured that Congress remained informed about large humanitarian initiatives, financial commitments, and Security Council actions. During the 1990s, as the Cold War ended, the United Nations took on new roles in conflict resolution and post-conflict reconstruction. The United States participated in missions in the Middle East, the Balkans, Africa, and Latin America. The Participation Act continued to regulate the legal and diplomatic framework through which American forces could take part in UN-authorized operations. Debates in Congress about peacekeeping costs and oversight consistently relied on the Act's provisions. In the early 2000s, global security concerns shifted toward counterterrorism, international criminal justice, and non-state threats. The Act maintained the mechanism that allowed U.S. representatives to negotiate Security Council resolutions, establishing international sanctions, counterterrorism committees, and tribunals. American actions in these areas followed the same legal foundation established in 1945. As the 21st century progressed, the United Nations became increasingly involved in global health, environmental policy, migration, and humanitarian response. U.S. involvement in agencies addressing HIV/AIDS, climate agreements, sustainable development, and global emergency relief operated under the authority originally granted in the Participation Act. Congressional debates over funding to programs such as peacekeeping operations, refugee assistance, and health initiatives relied on the Act's language governing contributions and obligations. Today, the 1945 Act remains the legal basis for every U.S. diplomatic action taken within the United Nations system. It governs the appointment of the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, outlines the responsibilities of the mission, and defines the reporting structure between the executive branch and Congress. It ensures that U.S. participation in Security Council decisions, humanitarian programs, and international legal frameworks is grounded in statutory authority. Across nearly 8 decades, the United Nations Participation Act of 1945 has maintained continuity in American involvement in global governance. Every major era of U.S. foreign policy, from post-war Reconstruction to Cold War diplomacy, from decolonization to modern global challenges, has depended on the structure created by this law. Its influence persists in diplomatic practice, legislative oversight, and international cooperation. The Act remains a central pillar of American engagement with the international system, demonstrating how a statute passed at the close of World War II continues to guide decisions shaping the modern era. For enthusiasts of historical ephemera, visit history-collectors.com to find collectibles that might complement your collection. You can own a piece of history.